Hello everybody, welcome back to the channel. My name is Nick. I'm joined with my good friend here, Pam. And today, I'm going to talk about a very controversial subject to the Crested Gecko community. Can you cohab your geckos all year round? Let's get into the pros, the cons, and let's kind of talk about what happens versus, I'll tell you what I do, and I'll tell you how you can do it, how I have done it, all the good stuff. So let's get right into it. Okay, so the first thing is we need to establish can and should. Okay, can and should have two very different meanings. Can you do something versus should you do something? Now, the other thing to remember with can and should is everybody's lines of where can and should meet are very different. Some people who are very strict, it can versus should is black and white. Some people who are not very strict, can and should, it kind of walks a gray line where it's like, yeah, well, I don't know. So can and should are very different things, and also remember too, can and should will vary drastically depending on who you're talking to, and there's just a lot of things that can affect that. So understand that difference, and that's because that's very important to controversial topics, is just kind of seeing all sides of it and understanding why maybe this happens versus why it doesn't happen. So have I cohab my breeders all year round before? Yes. Do I right now? No. Do big breeders do it? Absolutely. Do small breeders do it? I think some do. I think some don't. I think it's kind of dependent upon who you're talking to, and I think it's kind of dependent too upon their experience level and kind of how they were taught versus how certain people are taught now. That can make a huge difference on who your mentor is and who kind of like showed you the ropes will drastically play a huge role in how you do things. So just because someone does something wrong to them may not be wrong, and honestly, if it's your opinion that it's wrong, then it also may be right. You could, it kind of goes both ways there. So, and understand too that people who are trained to do something one way for a very long time have a very, very hard time seeing another way, and that's okay. That's human nature. That is what it is. So the benefits to cohabbing all year round are that you're going to constantly have fertile eggs. The one thing though that if you do cohab all year round that you have to understand that is very, 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 very important is you have to cool down in the winter. And what I mean by like cool down is you need to make sure that room temperature drops a little bit for 3 to 4 months. And what this is going to do, and honestly they do it naturally as well, it's going to trigger the pheromones and the breeding season kind of signals to an end, so that in theory the males should not mate the females, but it's very important that you cool off your room compared to where it was at during these summer months and the spring and summer months, right? So that's kind of a tough thing to do unless you have a very room that's very air controlled and a very specific dedicated area. Now some of you who live in drafty homes, during the summer your home's warmer, during the winter your home's colder, so you might be getting away with it just because your home's drafty, right? If you live in a newer home, then you probably don't have a drafty home, so you're probably able to kind of stay like we in this house, 68 to 70s where we hang all year round. So I mean, I don't have the luxury of, well, I do because I have gecko rooms that are still being worked on, but I have gecko rooms that I will be able to control, but I'm still not going to cohab all year round. Now another thing, when I was first taught, and I talked to breeders and I kind of got their opinions on things, some breeders they were telling me I cohab for 8 months and then I separate for 3.5 to 4 months. Or I cohab for 9 months and I separate for 3 months. What this does is that simulates a winter cool down, but more importantly, if you can't cool down, at a minimum you're separating that female, and so that she is actually going to really take a natural break from laying because she's not around the male. We've done that before as well. That worked out very nicely for us, but the reason that I got away from it, and I've talked about in the past, I made videos on it, I just personally don't like cohabbing anymore. It was, and this is where this kind of leads into my next topic, okay? Business and hobby walk a fine line, okay? You have the business side of Crested Geckos where you breed mass quantities and you sell mass quantities of geckos, okay? There is nothing wrong with that. I mean, it is what it is. It happens. I don't think it'll ever stop, and if it does stop, then the hobby stops completely, so I think that that's the worst thing that can happen. But you do have to understand that there are people out there who do this for their livelihood, okay? If they're doing it for their livelihood, now you have to take into consideration things like space, okay? Because space costs a lot of money. You are very limited in your space to income ratio, then you have to cohab. And I understand the arguments too of like, well, if you can't do it the right way, which the right way would be, in that person's opinion, the opposite of the way that that person's doing it, then you shouldn't be doing it at all. I get that argument too. I'm just saying that this is the world that we live in, and it really just is what it is. I mean, I don't know another way of talking about other than being like, hey, this is how it's done, so either hate it or love it, but there's people that do it both ways, so it is what it is. Whenever you walk that line of business versus hobby, like I said, now your income's on the line. You know, I don't think that it means that these big breeders who do this full time, I don't think they love their geckos any less than you or I or other smaller breeders, even someone who just has one gecko. I think that all these guys and gals love their animals wholeheartedly, because the other part of this too is that, and this is one of the reasons I quit cohabbing, it takes a lot of time, effort, energy. Some people will tell you, the throw them together, don't worry about it. Never an issue. Ha, look at that. Never happens. It's not the case. It's just not how it works. It takes a lot of knowledge, and it takes a lot of time to kind of go in there, look around, and kind of look at how everything's going. You have to be a lot more diligent in making sure that everybody is eating. And I know that that sounds, to some people that may sound simple, but I can tell you it's a very difficult task, because you have to be even better at making sure you get weights on your animals than if you normally do. I am terrible at weighing my geckos. Partially that's because I've gotten to a point where all my geckos, I kind of know them now, and I have a good idea of what to expect from them. So with that said, Pam here a couple months ago, she kind of fell ill. She was looking thinner. She had calcium deficiencies. Had I been weighing her, would I have caught it sooner? There's an argument to say yes. There's an argument to say not really. I caught it because I know what she's supposed to look like, and she wasn't looking like that. Now I will say though, when I was cohabbing, I was very diligent on weighing everybody once a week. I was very like, if I saw a gecko lose grams at all, I would dig for eggs, and if I didn't find eggs, I got very worried, and then I would kind of separate them or ride it out another week. That's where I had a hard time of like, for me, I think I was overthinking a lot of it, and I was making it very difficult on myself, because whenever you're cohabbing them, it gets to a point where like, you have to be very careful. And like I said, I know some people out there right now are watching this and they're saying, it's easy, it's so many myths about it and all this stuff. I'm just talking from my experience. I had a hard time with it. How I breed now, we got everybody separate. I pair. This year, to this date, so this is filmed in August, I've only paired 3 times this year. All my females have only been paired 3 times, and we're doing just fine. I mean, we're still laying fertile eggs for some of them. If you go watch another video, I kind of talk about it more. But it is very interesting it's an interesting discussion. I still think that if you are going to cohab, in my opinion, especially if you're a beginner, or you're, you know, mainly if you're a beginner who wants to breed, I would recommend doing it the way that I'm doing it currently, where you only pair a couple times a year, because they really don't need year-round. You're doing it strictly for space. And understand, too, the geckos don't get anything they don't get anything out of this. They don't get anything out of being cohabbed. I understand there's people who argue that. How do you know? How do you know? How do you know? Well, they do fine alone. And I think that animals that do fine alone, not say that they can't do fine in a group. I'm just saying that they do fine alone. Typically, that's a trigger to me to say they don't get depressed. They don't miss their families. They don't seek, you know, things like this. There is a discussion to be had for cohab, like if you see them laying on top of each other or hanging out in groups together. These could be signs of stress. They could not be. The problem is that there are so many variables to where, if you got a tank, okay, let's say it's 30 gallons and you put 3 geckos in there, it's a 30-gallon tank. The odds of 2 of them, okay, being close to each other, first of all, they're always close to each other. If they're sleeping on top of each other, the odds of that being a sign of aggression versus just happening to fall asleep in the same spot are very close. Like, you're not talking a huge, like, variance in, like, the fact that they chose the same hide to sleep in could be as bad as bullying and, you know, like, pretty much just bullying, okay? I was trying to think of another word, but whatever. It could be bullying, or it could just be a coincidence that they climbed into the same hole together. You don't know. So, and that was part of the thing too, where the more research that I did into it, and I came to my own opinions, and I talked to other breeders that I do like respect and who know a lot more than me and have a lot more experience than me. And I talk to some breeders who do it, who cohab, and they have a lot more experience than me. I'm not saying that they're wrong. I'm just saying that's not what worked for me. So I do think that there should be a certain level of experience you should have before you start wanting to cohab. Unfortunately, though, the way that this hobby works is that's typically not how, you know, people want to dive into it. People want to get a bunch of big group of geckos and breed them, and then kind of like, then you're out of the hobby in 2 years because it's terrible to keep that way. Like, it's very stressful. It's just a lot of work, and you gotta be on. You gotta have your P's and Q's. You know, your T's crossed and your I's dotted. So I think what this boils down to is, in my opinion, cohab is simply not necessary. It's certainly not required, because I have proved that here with myself. It's certainly not required. And they just don't, you have to understand, you have to be honest with yourself. If you're cohabbing, you're doing it for you, not for the animals. You will never ever in a million years convince, honestly, anybody that it benefits the animals more than it benefits you. It's not an argument worth fighting. If you do cohab and you're good at it, good for you. Own it, because it can be done. And that's kind of the whole, like, see, issue that I have with the argument is, you know, like I talked about earlier, can and should. It's very, like, everyone wants to be right and everyone thinks that they're right, and there are more ways to do it. I think it's just more important to be honest and just say, hey, I cohab because it saves me space, which saves me time, which saves me money. Done. Easy as that. That's all you gotta say. I mean, sure, some people look down on you for it. Some people will say, cool, I live the same way. But it doesn't matter. And as long as your geckos are healthy, it shouldn't matter, right? I mean, but there are some breeders out there. There's some breeders out there who keep them single, who are awful keepers. And there's breeders out there who keep them all together, and they're awful keepers. It happens. There's good guys and there's bad guys. It just is what it is. So, those are just my opinions on this. Comment down below your opinions on this, because I'm sure there's a ton of them. If I missed anything, let me know, because, you know, sometimes these videos, I'll make a bunch of notes, and I'll, like, you know, write down everything I want to say and cover, and I miss stuff. You know, it happens, believe it or not. So, thanks for watching, guys. Hit that subscribe button, hit that thumbs up button, and until next time, guys, stay safe and stay positive.